Hi everyone, welcome to 20 Minutes with AfrAsia on the topic ESG and responsible investing, deal or no deal. In this changing world where sustainability has moved from the sideline to the forefront, environmental, social and governance, ESG metrics are increasingly being used by investors to analyze companies' resilience and growth opportunities. These non-financial metrics have become paramount to organizations who wish to remain relevant in the corporate world. Thank you all for joining us today. Feel free, of course, to send us your questions during the webinar, and we will try to take them at the end of this webinar. Let me start by introducing today, first of all, Edouard Chevalier from AFD, live from Paris, and Nicole Martens from Unpri, live from South Africa, and myself, Lovna from AfrAsia Bank. Let's start with you, Edouard. Can you maybe, for our audience today, shortly describe the Agence Française de Développement? Thank you.
Yes, first, let me thank you and thanks AfrAsia Bank for having invited the Agence Française de Développement to this webinar. So the Agence Française de Développement is both a bank, a development bank, and a French public entity, which is in charge of the promotion, the implementation of French policy in terms of development and international solidarity in general.
What is exactly the role of AFD in the promotion of responsible investment, and what type of support do you provide?
Well, the goal and the mission of the Agence Française de Développement is to fund, of course, projects and to support the transition to a more, let's say, sustainable and a more inclusive world. So to respond to your question, I can answer that the promotion of responsible investments is the reason that we exist, the Agence Française de Développement, and we only finance responsible projects on climate change mitigation, for example, on climate change adaptation, on green energy production, on biodiversity conservation, and on health and education sectors, for example. And the kind of support that we provide are mainly loans, but we can also provide grants and technical assistance as well. But we mainly do loans. And this kind of supports are provided or delivered to many different kind of actors, to states, of course, but also to local authorities, to private companies, to private banks like AfrAsia, and as well to some NGOs.
Thank you. And if you can describe a bit, what are the main projects that link ESG to AFD?
Well, that's a good question, and actually all the projects that we finance are linked to ESG. And to make sure of that, to make sure that all the projects that we finance support the transition to a more inclusive world, to a more sustainable world, the project team, for each project under review, under instruction, have to prepare what we call internally a sustainable development analysis that have to showcase, let's say, the expected outcomes of the projects in terms of climate change resilience, in terms of transition to a low carbon economy, in terms of biodiversity conservation, in terms of gender equality. And the decision by our committees to finance or not a project is based on that very same sustainable development analysis. And if the expected outcomes are not positive, we simply don't finance the project. So all the projects are linked to ESG at AFD.
Okay. Maybe you can share with us one example.
Yeah, sure. So I'll talk about the one I know the best. So the Sunwave credit lines. For the record, we just signed one, and we are very proud of it, with AfrAsia Bank for 10 million euro. And so these green credit lines are granted to local commercial partner banks so that they can finance green projects on climate change mitigation and adaptation, and to make sure that the finance projects meets our expectations as a development bank. We set up technical eligibility criteria that the projects have to meet, to respect, so that the local partner bank, like AfrAsia, can finance them.
Thank you, Edouard.
Thank you, Luna.
Thank you. Nicole, after Edouard, French, mainly what he discussed on the French government and how they intervene within countries, etc. How exactly does Unpri support organizations who wish to go into responsible investments?
Great, yeah, thanks, Abdel, thanks, Edouard. Thanks again for the invitation to join you guys today. The PRI itself works with investors, which includes asset owners, so large funds, life offices, family offices, sovereign wealth funds, insurers, asset managers, and also service providers in the investment space, which is everything from data providers to consultants and even stock exchanges, to implement what we call the principles of responsible investment. And these principles themselves revolve around incorporating ESG factors into your investment approach and your active ownership decisions. The key way that we provide support is through the production of what are literal handbooks or guidebooks on international best practice for ESG integration or responsible investment across specific asset classes or with respect to very particular ESG issues. The handbooks that we produce are publicly available, and they are drafted in collaboration with investors, which means that they're very practical. They remain principles-based, so they're not prescriptive, which allows you to adapt the best practice to your context. In addition to this, we also work with investors to facilitate engagement, so sometimes with companies or with industries or with policymakers and regulators on specific ESG issues. And the main, one of the major things that we do as the PRI is we allow signatories or investors to connect with one another and to engage and learn from one another and from best practice. And you can find out all about what we do on our website.
Yes, I'm sure companies face many challenges. And according to you, what are the main challenges encountered by organizations who use actually ESG in investments? And how would you recommend that they overcome same?
Sure. So it is a challenge. I think the key challenges that investors face in an ESG integration approach is really nuanced, and so it will depend on the investor in question. But things that we find commonly as the major challenge that investors face is actually internal buy-in for a change of approach. One of the most difficult things to do is to retrofit existing processes and policies and team structures in order to try a new method. That said, because for responsible investment to be effective, it has to be integrated across the organization. It can't be seen as an afterthought or a nice to have, and that's usually the big challenge, is managing to mainstream it through your organization. The availability and the quality of ESG data is also a major challenge globally, and to Edouard's point, you need to be able to measure and report on the impact that you're having and the impact of ESG factors on your investments, and that can be very challenging. So I think, overall, if you haven't been doing it, integrating ESG into your investment process can seem like quite a daunting task. But what we do know is that it's increasingly being set as the minimum standard by policymakers and regulators. So it's inevitable that this will be the way you need to think about your investment approach going forward. We have increasing evidence that ESG integration has financial materiality, which also means that apart from the regulatory pressure you might face, not integrating ESG into your investment process going forward would make you actually just a bad investor, because you'd be leaving returns on the table. I'd say the biggest challenge and the most important thing to do is just to get started. If you wait for everything to be perfect, for some standardized frameworks or for perfect data, you'll miss the boat entirely if you haven't already done so. But what we definitely see is that responsible investment is a journey. and the practice around responsible investment is rapidly evolving. So, Livna, I'd be curious to see from your side how you see the evolution of ESG in Mauritius and particularly at AfrAsia.
Well, for me, the evolution of ESG in Mauritius and particularly AfrAsia Bank will have, of course, to adapt to three increasing concerns, I must say. First, the world of business as usual, as we called it before, will have to evolve more around what we call business unusual, which is a term that the UN has framed 2 years back. The world is changing, and global sustainability challenges such as COVID and rising sea level, regulatory pressures, etc., are introducing new risk factors for investors that may not have been seen previously. As companies are facing a global complexity of adaptation and mitigation, investors may want to reevaluate their traditional investment approaches. And we will, of course, have to take this into consideration as a country and as a bank. These investors may seek to direct their capital towards companies that provide solutions, more solutions towards social and environmental challenges. And of course, through frameworks such as the UN Sustainable Development Goals, monitor the extent to which the investment are generating positive social and environmental impacts, with, of course, thinking about their financial returns. Well, I've just seen, according to studies from PwC, over the next 2-3 decades, the millennial generation could put between $15 trillion and $20 trillion into US domiciled ESG investments, which could roughly double the size of the US equity market, which is huge, which will, of course, at the end of the day, impact the global economy. Investors are changing, and we see it every day in our banking world. And a growing body of studies suggests that millennials, as well as women, are asking more of their investments. Last, with better data from companies combined with better ESG research and analytical capabilities, we are seeing more systematic, objective, and financially relevant approaches to ESG key issues. Well, I guess if the macroeconomic factors around ESG are not well thought and the policies and regulations around this subject are not defined, the evolution of ESG principles and practices in banks will remain at a micro perspective. Without a framework, how do we go towards the next level is actually, I guess, the main question to ask ourselves as banks.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. And the Principles of Responsible Banking actually just celebrated its first anniversary. So strongly encourage you to have a look at that as well. What we at PRI have found is that, just like you say, the main drivers of ESG integration uptake are the financial materiality of this kind of investment, increasing market demand, and increasing regulatory pressure. At the bank level, what would you say is the main driver for ESG?
Well, just giving a small story around AfrAsia Bank. AfrAsia Bank has been gradually integrating principle of sustainability, just like you said before. We have to jump in at some point. Since 2015, we believe in adopting an integrated approach, of course, and our strategy takes into consideration financial, human, social, natural, intellectual, etc. capitals. We had a 2021 strategy, which was based on 4 pillars mainly, and which is further developed into a 6 core focus area for sustainability. As a bank and a financial institution, we have a key role to play in transitioning towards a low carbon economy, and we have been aware of this since the beginning. We want to reduce, of course, our direct and indirect impact, and also give our customers an opportunity to invest into climate solutions. For this, what we did actually is we went toward a responsible banking strategy since 2015, as I just said. And we have been since then developing sustainable banking products and services for our clients. Moving in this direction, we offer our clients the possibility to invest in the sustainable smart city megatrends right now. And since last year, our bank has been increasingly investing in sustainable products. We have launched our green car loan, for example, a structured deposit solution in Euro, USD, and Mauritius rupees, which is linked to iStock Global Cities of Tomorrow Select 30 and or decrement 5%. And we recently, as Edouard mentioned before, signed with AFD in context of the SUNREF 3 bis program. So this is, of course, a significant number of, there is, of course, a significant number of frameworks and voluntary standards, like, for example, Unpri, that already exist for ESG reporting. So instead of reinventing the wheel by creating new standards, we aim at AfrAsia to amplify and elevate the rigorous work that is already being done by initiatives such as AFD, UN Global Compact, Unpri, and GRI. So I guess that's where we are at AfrAsia Bank right now.
It's great.
Yes, so just to, as you all know, we have 20 minutes, so we will maybe take on board the 2 or 3 questions if we have some time. We will start maybe with, we got some questions from you, from the audience, and we will maybe start with you, Edouard.
Sure.
There's a question from Raj in India on the impact of COVID on AFD's investment portfolio. Can you give us a small perspective of that?
Yes, sure. So with the pandemic and the COVID-19 crisis, we had to reorganize our investment portfolio, and the AFD board of directors have approved beginning of April a new initiative which is called a COVID-19 Health in Common initiative that includes 1 billion euros in form of loans and 150 million euros in form of donations to answer to the economic and the health crisis that our partner countries are facing. And for example, in Mauritius, we have signed end of July a 300 million euro contingency loan with the government of Mauritius. And so Mauritius is part of this reorganization of our investment portfolio linked to the COVID-19 crisis.
Thank you, Edouard. We have a question from maybe for you, Nicole, from J. Raj from Nigeria. Which metrics are generally accepted for impact measurement? Well, Gerard spoke about IRIS or G2N, but if you have any other comments on this. Thank you.
Sure, that's a great question. When you are looking at impact measurement, what you'll find is that it depends on who you're reporting to. They usually will have, whoever's requiring the reporting will have a preferred framework that they want to use. One thing that is interesting to note is that the GRI recently did a study, and they found that there's more than 800 reporting and disclosure frameworks around the world, and more than 70% of those reference GRI directly. So I would say a first port of call is to look at the GRI guidance and make sure you're at least looking at the correct kinds of data, and then use the appropriate tool based on the kind of data that you are collecting.
Thank you for that, Nicole. Maybe 2 last questions before we wrap up. Nicole, we have another question from England, and how can Unpri help countries define policies and framework around ESG?
Great question. Thank you for that one. And it's actually one of the things that we do. You know, at PRI, we realize that all the goodwill in the world means nothing if the regulatory and policy environment is not conducive to responsible investment. So we actually work quite closely with policymakers and regulators in creating enabling environments for responsible investment. We've got guidance for investors on how to engage with policymakers and regulators on ESG. We've got guidance on the sustainable recovery from the pandemic. And we've also, in the next few weeks, are releasing for emerging markets policy toolkits, which will essentially be a guidebook for policymakers and regulators that will outline what are the core policies and regulatory frameworks and tools that should be in place for a market to enable and catalyze responsible investment.
Thank you for that, Nicole. I think we've reached our timeline of 20 minutes with AfrAsia. We will, of course, answer to all the questions individually after this webinar to those who have questions around. Hope you enjoyed our 20 minutes with AfrAsia. I would like to thank Edouard and Nicole for joining us today, and all of you audience. You can also direct your questions to Nicole and Edouard on their emails. We'll send you same, and we will also share the replay with you. So thank you all for that. See you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Louvna.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.